Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us here on the Infinite Prosperity Podcast. My name is Louisa and I help high achievers, entrepreneurs and coaches lift the lid on life and business so that they can live at their highest value. Each episode, we will bring you our favourite founders, CEOs and guest experts to share with you their insights and strategies to expand your wealth consciousness, your spiritual leadership and aligned business strategies. We know that living in alignment with your soul's mission is what fulfills you, and we are here to show you how to achieve this in an energetically aligned way. If you haven't already, be sure to claim your free abundance activation in the Akashic Records. Go to louisahavers.com/gift to unlock your abundance activation today. And if you'd like my support in having aligned success in life and business, then contact me at www.louisahavers.com and let's explore together if it's an aligned match. Get ready to live at your highest value and to expand into your next level of money as you elevate and receive more. You create more for others. Righty ho, let's dive into today's episode. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to this week's episode. I am so excited that you are all here and tuning in. We have a treat for you. Today, we are talking all about spiritual intelligence with the one and only Dr. Robyn Mckay. Welcome, Robyn.
Hello. Hi, so good to be here with you.
Thank you so much for joining us. And I'm so excited for everyone to get to meet you and to be able to come and spend some time in your world. For those of you that are yet to meet Robyn, let me share a little bit of an introduction with you so you can see why we are blessed to be having this conversation today. So Dr. Robyn Mckay is an award-winning psychologist, multi-six-figure entrepreneur, and an executive coach to top leaders in Fortune 500 companies and entertainment. Dr. Robyn Mckay is also a leading expert in the new field of spiritual intelligence, and she builds bridges between reason and intuition, science and spirit, and her clients' heads and hearts. And in her life outside the office, Robyn loves hiking on the desert trails near her home in Scottsdale and climbing the red rocks of Sedona.
Oh, yes, ma'am. So my stomping ground. Yep.
And I love your Facebook profile and all the images that you share from these amazing places that you get to go and stomp in.
We just took Cooper, our golden doodle puppy. Well, he's still a puppy. He's not two yet. To Sedona a couple weeks ago, and he did so good. He was like this athletic, agile, scrambling up red rocks. It was so cool to see. So I think we'll be doing that again soon. It was the first time we'd brought him to Sedona. He stayed with us in this beautiful resort where we stay when we go, and it's pet friendly, and I feel so grateful for that because he's part of the family.
Yes. Oh, there's not enough places that are pet friendly. Oh, that's so special.
I know it.
He is absolutely gorgeous. It's another reason for people to come out and hang out in your Instagram world and Facebook world.
Or in IRL too. Come over to Sedona. I'm doing retreats there this year, and it just is a really powerful portal energetically that I've gotten a lot of good downloads and insights and just activations as well when I'm there. So certainly that happens for my clients as well.
Oh, so magical. Oh, exciting. Oh, love it. I love it. Robyn, tell everybody, I know we've had many conversations before about your journey, but I just think it's such a beautiful story that you have. And if you would be so kind to share your journey, how did you get to where you are today? How did you start your business? What made you start your business?
Such a great question. To answer that, I have to go back to, well, there are a couple of points of entry. Let me just tune in. Okay, so we're going to go back to before my spiritual awakening. I was always intuitive, but it was not something that I ever talked about or realized that it was something special about me. So I was married to my college sweetheart, and about 6 or 7 years into that marriage, I realized that I'm in the wrong, I felt like I was in the wrong life, actually, somebody else's life. And I decided that I was going to leave that marriage. I had primarily felt really called to get my PhD or some kind of doctoral degree. I had known that since I was a little girl, like 5 or 6 years old. I knew I was going to be a doctor and write books. And so by the time I turned 30, that was when I left my marriage. That was when so I'm sharing this because I want to kind of contextualize it in the frame of spiritual intelligence, but I left my marriage, and it was at that point that my spiritual gifts awakened. Like I really began to realize that, wow, like I have a lot of connection with God. I remember I was on the phone with my dad feeling so puny and miserable about leaving my marriage. And because, I was Catholic and there was a whole thing around that, staying in your marriage. And I just couldn't. And I knew that I couldn't. So I was on the phone with my dad, who was a big supporter of mine. He always has been. And I felt like God didn't love me. And he said, Robyn, I want you to stop right now. And I want you to ask God. And of course I heard God say, yes, Robyn, I love you. But that changed everything for me because that made it real and it made it mine. In the past, I think that my connection with God had been kind of part of the collective of my family, part of the way that things were done within the Catholic Church. And now in that moment, there was a pivot that created the conditions for me to recognize that no, my divine connection is mine. And therefore, it's also my responsibility to learn about it, to develop my gifts, and ultimately to share them with people like you in the podcast so many years later. So that was kind of the core of the why I started my business. I knew that I still had to get my PhD. That was one thing that I did almost immediately after leaving my marriage. I started back to getting my master's degree in psychology, but simultaneously with that, I was also embarking on what would become a 7-year journey in spiritual intelligence, an apprenticeship really is what I would call it, with a couple of different teachers who I'm still connected with to this day. But they were the ones who really helped me to awaken and arise to my spiritual gifts of intuition, but beyond intuition, being able to see into what's possible for myself and other people, to really own my clairsentience, that sense of I call it my spidey sense, but being able to feel into, to be able to read a room, being able to feel and respond to other people's emotions and energies. And my gift of healing as well. As you know, you and I have talked a lot about, healing on the quantum plane. I know that that's part of your work as well, but that was something that I actually got attuned at the master level at Reiki pretty quickly early on in my career. And one of our mutual colleagues calls Reiki the gateway drug to all of the other things. But that was really kind of the beginning of my journey is awakening to my gifts, my spiritual gifts, and then arising to them, meaning that I was making them my own. I was learning about them, and I was developing some mastery around those gifts that I would eventually be able to share with other people. So I'll stop there because that was just like a lot to take in.
Oh, it's so exciting to hear how your gifts unfolded, because everybody is so different, aren't they? With some people right from an early age being very, very aware of them, and then others, often I find it is a life event that is that turning point to suddenly feeling.
I think that for me, I always knew that I was connected. I remember I was less than 3 years old when my mom taught me how to pray the guardian angel prayer from Catholic school. If you remember that, if you were raised Catholic or were around that, angel of God, my guardian dear. I remember that she taught me that, and that's when I came online. I remember knowing in that moment that I was not alone. That was when I was under 3. And so throughout my formative years and on into my 20s, I would use the word latent to describe my gifts, meaning that I wasn't actively using them. I would sneak into the library in middle school and high school to sneak read books on witchcraft and astral travel and all kinds of things that I would have to sneak, because if somebody found out that I was reading those, that would be just a really not such a good thing, I think, at that time. So that it was always present for me, but it was that turning point, that divorce and the subsequent emotional journey that I embarked on when I was around 30 that really created, I'm looking for a word here, just a conscious and whole connection with my gifts, if that makes sense.
It really
taking
does.
ownership of them, I think, is a good way of explaining it.
And recognizing them for what they are, the power of have all that power and wisdom within. One of the things I wondered if this had come up for you in terms of recognizing this for other people, just knowing your background in terms of working in, you know, with a lot of in corporate, is something that I recognize with people. Well, certainly for me, when I was in the corporate world, I felt very disconnected from my heart. So I always used to talk about how, you know, in the corporate world, I was like living from my head, and it felt like I kind of, you know, just chopped my head off and disconnected from my heart. And then when the moment that I left and stepped into the entrepreneurial space, that connection from my head and my heart was opened up. And then suddenly the gifts that had been kind of bubbling beneath the surface that I'd been ignoring and letting my brain try and make reason
do
of
all
them.
the heavy lifting. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Suddenly everything was unlocked. And I know that you help many people really recognize what is going on for them, you know, with the work that you do and the neo assessment, etc. Whether that you've seen any correlation for other people as well with that sort of disconnection with their head and the heart in various fields, I guess.
Well, you know, my whole thing is that I build the bridge between the head and the heart. And then as I was listening to you do the intro today, I thought, and then when they get in the heart, I blow up the bridge. I'm kidding.
That's such a good analogy.
Blow it up. And kind of, because I think so many of us over rely on our intellect, not for any other reason, but because we can really. So when, to answer your question, one of the things that I see people coming in, especially from corporate to work with me, is that they're burned out. That's one of the number one signs that there's something else going on, that they are cut off from their hearts, from their intuition, from who they really are as divine and eternal beings of love, light, and truth. Are they ready to hear that at that moment that they're burned out? No, they just want to feel better. They want to be more innovative. They want to be more creative. They're tired of doing all the heavy lifting, but they don't see another way. And so that's often when they will come to me. In the last couple of years, on top of the burnout, we're also seeing a lot of existential crisis, existential angst, anxiety, depression that comes from just living in this world where everything is being called into question right now. What is real? What is not? What is the meaning of my life? What is my purpose? What am I here for? So there are a whole lot of early level activations around spiritual awakening that are happening, and they're kind of on the cusp of that. They've lost a couple of people recently. You know, some people in their lives have died, and they're like, what is the meaning of my life now that this person is absent from it? How do I fill up the hole? Those kinds of very human questions bring them in. And then from there, we get to explore what exactly is going on here for you. And it's different for everybody, but there are some themes, of course, that come forward that I often will identify. You mentioned the NEO, the personality assessment that you've taken, and that everybody who comes into my world has the opportunity to take. That's really where we begin in understanding and unpacking not just spiritual or energetic gifts, but just the gifts of being human, and what you're actually here for is embedded or coded in your personality. And that's what gets uncovered with that NEO personality assessment.
It is so good. Thank you so much for speaking to that. And I'd love for everyone to really understand the NEO because I remember saying, oh, there's the NEO assessment, and then there's the NEO assessment with you, which is, I think that's the you know, just absolutely phenomenal to be able to have that insight that the assessment gives, and to have your channeling your you know, take on it and what you're seeing in the assessment, and then what you're being shown as well. It blew my mind being able to kind of go, oh, right. And I've done many assessments, you know, personality profiles myself, got a background in psychology, so I feel like I can really, you know, I want to give the NEO a shout out here, having being able to compare it with many others. I guess the question is, you know, for people who are kind of wanting to think about, oh, what is the NEO? Tell me a little bit more about the NEO and how can it help people? I think that's probably a question that people want to know is, well, if I've, you know, already done this assessment and that assessment, what's the NEO going to help me with from a spiritual perspective? That's the incredible piece.
That is. there are a couple different angles we can take here. One of the things that I will be happy to describe what the Neo is, certainly. And don't you love that the name of it is Neo, like, Neo breaking the matrix?
Oh,
That's
yes.
I know.
I hadn't
So good.
That is so
Look
good.
at the intersection. I think on one of my enrollment pages, I actually have a GIF of Neo from the Matrix. Like, no, not that Neo, this one over here. The Neo is a 5-factor personality assessment that is a gold standard of assessments. Personality psychologists have been using this particular assessment, I'm going to say probably at this point for 70 years, maybe more than that. But it categorizes 5 different personality factors: openness, extroversion, agreeableness, conscientiousness, and neuroticism, and then compares your scores to other people who have taken it. So in other words, just like you would have taken a standardized assessment in undergrad or even in high school for the Americans, the ACT, the SAT. I don't know what the Brits take for the IB stuff, but whatever you're looking at, do you know what I mean though? It's norm-based and standardized. Or an IQ test would be another one to look at, or a GRE or an MCAT or anything like that, an LSAT, where you're compared to other people's scores. So too is the case with the Neo. This is one of the only times where I think comparison is a good thing, especially for the intuitives, the spiritually intelligent among us, because so much of our lives are spent thinking that we're supposed to be like everybody else and yet feel very different from everybody else. So finally, this assessment is the one that we can really dial in and say, this is why you have felt so different from everybody else your whole life. Because in a room of 100 people or 1,000 people or even 10,000 people, you have one of the most unique personalities. And you have assets within your personality that other people don't have. And so those are the spiritual gifts that I like to highlight. One of the things that I hear over and over again when I'm interpreting a Neo for somebody is, I feel so seen. I feel so seen. There is validation in being shown who you actually are, even though you intuitively know, to have another person, in this case, me, be able to say no. And here's the data that supports what you already know about yourself. So there's something about getting the intellectual buy-in, right? The rational, looking at the graph on the screen, looking at your numbers and saying, oh, actually, I'm one of the most emotionally intelligent people in the room. Is it any wonder that I feel like most of them are knuckle draggers? Well, no, it's not, because most of them actually, sorry, that was so mean to say about people who don't have a good emotional intelligence, but there are some people who don't. And as long as we can understand that that's just as a difference, and then for you, if you happen to have a high level of emotional intelligence or clairsentience, I would say would be another way to describe that, then we can help you understand why when you walk into a room, you can read it. You can pick up on everybody's vibe. You can know what's going on in the room without having to say a word. And I know that was something that came up for you when we were reading your Neo. Yeah.
Oh, as you were sharing that, you were reminding me of my scores and the impact for me of really being able to understand how I was in relation to other people. That was so helpful. And I remember I forget which bit it was, but it was something to do with everybody in the room, or most people in a room of 100 people are going to be more neurotic than you. And which just helped so much, because it really validated my experience when I'm working with other people, and particularly how other people will react if there's a crisis going on. It's like, okay.
Yes. Yeah. And by the way, for our listeners, neuroticism is a word that I don't really enjoy or appreciate because everybody uses it wrong or misunderstands it. But basically what Louisa is referring to is how sensitive she is to stress and how emotionally reactive she is. Since she has a low score in neuroticism, what that means is that she's going to be pretty unflappable in stressful crisis situations, which can be very helpful in the moment. But then over time, what it can lead to is some chronic stuff. Like the people who are not particularly neurotic don't really pay attention to their physical symptoms. So they end up with bladder infections and kidney infections and breast cancer, and because they're just ignoring their physical bodies, basically. So even though culturally, those of you who are low, do score lower on neuroticism are often celebrated for how unflappable you are, there's a cost to that as well. And that's one of the things that we have to talk about when we're going through your results is how can we dial in a little bit more your sensitivity to your body's needs and requirements so that you're optimized. Otherwise, you'll drive yourself into the ground, if that makes sense.
It makes so much sense. And I really hope that people are kind of recognizing that, because, you know, I am have had the burnout, so completely recognize that's what you were saying when we were talking, and obviously reflecting on it now around and of course at the point where I had the burnout, I was, you know, not listening to my heart. I was living in my head because I was in corporate, and being able to just put it all into context and go, oh, okay, now I know this. What does this mean for me moving forward in terms of recognizing how I can work with my business and be able to work in a way that is really good for me, and who my ideal clients are. I remember you talking to me about that in relation to their personality types, and I was like, oh my word, this is absolutely incredible. One of the things you shared a lot with me as well in relation to really understanding this in the different personality types and recognizing how the Neo can help people with really understanding their spiritual gifts, or whether they know about them, because some people don't know about them, you know, and they must come to you with.
It's one of my favorite things about it. You know, I learned how to interpret the Neo from my academic mentor. She is a distinguished professor at the University of Kansas. She is actually the lead author on the book I wrote with her called Smart Girls in the 21st Century. She had her own spiritual awakening back in, I don't know, the late 90s, I'll say, when she was in her 40s, and had come out of, I'm sharing this with you just to give context for, like, she's a very rational person. She was raised by an atheist and was, I think that she would consider herself atheist up until the point that she had her spiritual awakening. And then she realized that there was so much more to it than what she had originally assumed. But the Neo is really sitting at the intersection of that logic and intuition. And what she would say when she reads people's Neos is it's like doing a tarot card reading. And I would agree with that, because we can get at, just by looking at the results of the assessment itself, we can get at what are you actually coded for? What are your spiritual gifts? Even if you're somebody who's never even considered having spiritual gifts before. Now, I know because you're you, I know that your audience will already be awake to some of their gifts, but there can be, do you remember this when you were first awakening? Like, you kind of had a question mark. Well, are you sure that I'm intuitive? Are you sure? How do I know for sure? What proof do I have? Am I going crazy? There are a lot of those sort of gaslighting questions that we ask ourselves because our experiences are quite different from the normative population, from most people's experiences. We really are seeking at that time validation or confirmation that this is actually our experience. I don't, as I know you realize, I don't want anybody to abdicate their power around their spiritual gifts, but there is something really important about having your spiritual gifts validated by somebody who can see the truth of who you are. And that's one of my gifts, actually. Barb and I used to say that I see them. I can look at somebody and see what the spiritual gifts are. And she, when we would work together, she would just do these downloads of all of the ways that their gifts contribute to the culture, to the evolution of the world, and so on. It was a really fascinating experience to have both of us. Yeah. I imagine quite intense as well for some people. But when we're working with people who are just waking up and aren't even sure if they have spiritual gifts, they're in existential crisis or angst, they're burned out, when I can sit with them and explain why your personality has created the conditions for you to burn out, that's an important consideration. And then really looking at some of the abilities that you have that may have either gone underground or you just never talk about, like with the engineers. You know, I work with a lot of, especially female engineers who are emotionally intelligent. Many of them are psychic. Would they use that word? No. But they would say, well, when I was like in 6th grade, my mom and I had a game where I would guess what meal she was making. And then I would come home and she would have made that meal. So she was practicing some form of telepathy. even though she didn't have a word for it, right?
Yeah.
So there are these moments where you recognize you have the gift, but you don't know what to do with it, so you don't talk about it. So validating early childhood experiences around energetic and spiritual abilities is another piece of the interpretation. And do you remember on yours, we were looking at because you score really low on extroversion, like you're one of the most introverted humans on the planet. Remember I said, I think it was during the pandemic we were doing this, I said you were wired for this time, like it. Yes. You are so happy to be, cocooned in your space and happy to be looking at your screen and talking to people through the screen rather than in person. That was one of the, those are some of the things that you don't always see as gifts, but it helps make sense of why you're thriving in a certain circumstance or situation where other people may be languishing.
Yes. Yeah, I do remember that. It really made me laugh. I was like, oh yes, wired for lockdown.
I think I also said that you are wired, you have the profile of a writer as well.
Yes. And the book
an author
has been called to come forward this year. So yeah. finally honoring that piece of me. Yes, no, I found it absolutely fascinating, and I just think it is so helpful, like those pieces that you were talking about, to really be able to fully understand from the spiritual and the psychological perspective, and then how then you can make different choices moving forward in your business to really honor who you're coded for. And one of the things that we have talked about before, which I just would love to bring in, as we've been talking about patterns and what you've seen with all your expertise and experience, is in relation to ADHD. And we've had conversations about ADHD before, and I know many of our audience members either are living with ADHD or they know somebody who's got ADHD. So the question might be popping into their head as well, is have you seen any links or any patterns with ADHD within the NEO assessments that you've done?
I have. And before I forget, if you all have not listened to my podcast episode on Mindset RX, where Louisa and I go into the Akashic records and find the spiritual and energetic roots of ADHD, listen to that. I think it's in the top 3 of episodes for my podcast. So we want to be sure to put that in the show notes so that people have access to that. That was a magical episode. Louisa was channeling her guides, and we had all kinds of information coming through around the what do you want to call that? Like I don't want to call it cures necessarily, but definitely workarounds for the symptoms of ADHD. Is that what you would say?
Yes, I suppose the language I would use would be around like a protocol for supporting, living in
making it work for you rather than be a stumbling block to your life. So with that, yes, there are some clues that we find in the NEO personality profile that are associated with symptoms of ADHD. The NEO profile is not an ADHD assessment, so I want to be clear about that. But I can see if I see some particular scores in the NEO, I'm going to ask after, do you have ADHD? Do you think you have ADHD? Do you want to know what some of them are?
Yes.
Cool. I'm going to go over to your NEO profile. I opened it up here for us, just so that I have a point of reference. Okay.
Yeah.
So let's go to inattentive ADHD, the daydreamer, the one who a lot of girls actually are undiagnosed with ADHD because we don't fit the characteristic hyperactivity, the little boys who can't sit still and they got ants in their pants and they're impulsive and hyperactive. That's the traditional kind of expression of ADHD symptoms. But then there's this inattentive type that gets often overlooked because we're in our head so much, right? We're daydreaming, we're thinking about other things, we're reading books in class rather than paying attention, all of those things that probably you had, Louisa, an experience with. I certainly did as well. So as I start with this explanation of the relationship between the symptoms of ADHD and the NEO personality profile, one of the things I want us to recognize is that there's been some research that was done years ago that looked at what are the symptoms of ADHD. So they looked at the diagnostic criteria And then they looked at the characteristics of the creative personality. Well, guess what? They're about the same. They're two sides of the same coin. So when I have somebody who's questioning if they do have ADHD, I'll say, go get tested, but you'll also want to be tested and assessed for creativity, for intuition, for your spiritual gifts as well, because I'm seeing a big intersection between the symptoms of ADHD and the characteristics of what I would say is the spiritually intelligent personality. So with that, when I look at inattentive type of ADHD, when I see somebody who scores very high on fantasy, which is your imagination, and Louisa, by the way, you do score very high in a room of 100, in a room of 1,000 people, there might be one or two actually who score higher than you on your openness. But when you score so high on imagination, you can see multiple potentialities. Did you see my light just flicker?
Yeah.
Oh, that was weird. Okay, so here we are in multiple potentialities. You can see down the road for what's going to happen, most likely, what the most likely outcomes are going to be. And you're actually able to envision and create the future based on just having that beautiful high level of fantasy in your personality. So that's one crossover between the spiritual gifts, the creativity, and then the ADHD symptoms. So that's one thing I'm going to look at. Another thing I'm going to look at is this facet called excitement seeking, which you score average on this. So this is definitely not you, but this excitement seeking, people who score high on excitement seeking are going to be the ones who are at the amusement parks, getting all the lights and the sounds and the going to concerts and not minding the flickering, seizure inducing light, or stunting on the HOV lane on their motorcycle, whatever that is. All of those really thrill-seeking activities are actually associated with the hyperactivity, with the impulsivity piece of the ADHD profile. Then if we go into the neuroticism factor, what we see is that there is a facet of neuroticism that's called impulsiveness. So people who score on impulsiveness are likely going to demonstrate some symptoms of ADHD and perhaps even some addictive symptoms as well, because those who score high on impulsiveness have difficulty tolerating frustration. So they do a lot of self-soothing activities like over shopping, over drinking, over gambling, over sexing, all of the overages. So if you're somebody like that, I'm not saying that you have an addiction, but you would probably be more prone to an addiction than those who would score lower on that, and also more prone to having an ADHD diagnosis. Let's see. What else do we want to talk about there? I think that those are the main ones that I would see that would give me clues that somebody's probably got an ADHD diagnosis. And the thing about that is too that there have been a lot of people who have been diagnosed with ADHD over the past couple of years in particular. And there is validation in that. It feels good sometimes to just have that diagnosis. I was diagnosed with ADHD in grad school, but I had been overlooked up until then. I have an inattentive type. I'm pretty quiet. I do a lot of doodling in classrooms or book reading or something else to keep my mind focused, because I'm also listening at the same time. It actually helps me focus. And yet I never was diagnosed as a kid, probably for that reason. So by the time I got into graduate school and I started testing people for ADHD and I started looking at the assessments, I was like, oh my God, like this is me. Like, what? Like a light bulb moment. But it helped me understand who I am and how I show up in the world. And I've had to have some workarounds too. Do you want to know something? I know I'm just talking stream of consciousness at this point, but I wanted to share this with you from a business perspective. I was on a call with my coach, who knows that I have ADHD, and she's so loving with me about my ADHD. She knows that if she sends me an email and if I don't answer it when I see it, it gets lost. Like, for example, so we were talking about client attraction, and we were talking about some new programs I have coming up. Have you seen my Becoming the Channel program that
Do you know what I was
So
showing
good.
my clients in IPC the other day, going, look at Robyn's profile. So I was
Oh,
introducing
so
each of
good.
them.
Yeah.
It's
So
so
becoming the
good.
channel has come
Mm,
forward. It's learning how to channel wealth consciousness and
mm,
other high frequency energetics, which is perfect for somebody who's got ADHD, frankly. But we were talking about that, and we were talking about some other programs I've got coming down the line this year. And she said, okay, so do you have like a list of people in your head who you think would be good candidates for these programs? Louisa, I have been in this field for more than 10 years, all
mm.
total, but formally for 10 years. She asks me this question, my mind goes blank. I see nobody. I'm like, I don't know. Then she says, because her husband has ADHD, she says, well, I know that my husband keeps cabinet doors open so he can see what's in them, because if he closes the door, he will immediately forget what's in them. I was like, oh my God, like that's what I do with client attraction sometimes.
Wow.
Isn't
Mm.
that fascinating? Like in all of, and so then I have to practice my faith and I have to do all this visualization, have to, but this is my process. I've just created a workaround for it. But having that bit of information that, oh no, that's my ADHD,
Yes.
that
Yeah.
forgets that I have a list of thousands of people, that I have, these gifts of being on other people's stages and their podcasts, that people are listening to me. I don't think of that when she asks the question, who's a good fit for this?
Mm.
My mind draws a complete blank. So if you're listening to this, I don't think, Louisa, that's a thing that you struggle with. I don't think, based on
With
your, or do you? I don't know.
Well, I was just trying to think. My brain's gone blank. No, I think, I think that I would say that I probably do, in that I know that if I'm asked a question beforehand and I know what we're going to talk about, my brain's got more processing time to think about all of the things that I want to talk about. Whereas if I'm asked a question that's like a deep question, like I've got to think about things like that off the cuff, I might not know the exact answer. Information will start to come through, but immediately I'll probably go nobody, and then I have to, because it's to be sort of shut it down rather than going, okay, hang on a second, let's feel into this and allow the information to come through, and that focus, if that makes
That
sense.
reminds me of something that I learned a long time ago with, those aha moments that everybody has. Usually it's in the shower, or you're doing something entirely different than what it looks like, than solving the problem. There is a functionality in the brain that your unconscious is constantly working on the problem, even though your conscious mind is like, feels blank. There's a lot going on unconsciously. Those aha moments that take place literally are light bulb moments in the brain. In other words, right before the solution appears, your whole brain goes dark. It basically goes offline for a split second. And then it comes back online with the solution. But literally, it's a light bulb moment.
That literally feels like that's what's happening.
Yes. Yes.
Wow.
So I don't know what that has to do with ADHD. Maybe nothing. But I do know that the creatives, the ones who are connected with divine source energy, who, like you, who are highly open to experiences, who challenge the status quo, who are constantly seeking solutions to real life problems, they're the ones who will usually have these light bulb moments. And we see that showing up in the Neo as well.
That's amazing. And you know what? As you were sharing that, I was thinking this makes sense in terms of one of the techniques that I love using and teaching my clients to use. It is, I call it living in the energy of the question. So asking a question from the consciousness of your future self, because it really plays into working with your consciousness and being able to have those light bulb moments and those intuitive hits to come through of call that person, or for the name to drop in of who would be ideal for your program. And I always say to my clients is, when those moments land and you get those intuitive hits, the question's answered because your subconscious has been working on it. You haven't actually had to try and figure it out. And don't try and figure it out. Allow that subconscious to do the work.
It's such a good reminder. And I think that you're right. I think that that's the process, especially if you do have symptoms of ADHD, is to do that process rather than to try to access the rational mind for those answers, because the rational mind literally does not know. I don't know. Nobody. I can't think of a single person.
With lists of thousands.
Or if I can, well, why would they want, whatever, like, well, they're probably busy or whatever. The rational mind sort of jumps in with all the excuses for why not as well. So adopting a more practical way of answering questions that's what you're talking about. It's much more practical for those of us who are intuitive, spiritually intelligent.
Oh, this is so good, Robyn. I could talk to you for
so good
days about this. I just absolutely love it. We'll have to have you back for round 2, so that we can carry on chatting about this. Are there, just as we wrap up, are there any top tips or recommendations that you'd love to share with the entrepreneurs who are listening in relation to what we've talked about?
Couple things. One is, the more you know yourself, the more confidence you have in your own capabilities. So that's one good reason to do the deep dive exploration into your personality, for example. But the other thing that we haven't really touched on is something that you alluded to earlier, which is being able to identify your ideal clients based on your own profile, to eliminate those people who, just because you can work with them doesn't mean you ought to. We refer to those as the struggle bunnies. And certainly there are a lot of, and you with your low neuroticism score are such a warm, fuzzy environment for the struggle bunnies. And you make them feel right at home. And there's nothing wrong with being a struggle bunny, but they're not the ones who are going to be accelerating into their next level of income, their next, level of influence, for sure. They're going to be kind of stuck in there. And, there are people out there to support them. If you're not one of them, to be able to know exactly who you're coded to work for and with can come through the Neo as well. So what else? What other tip, Louisa? What have you learned from me in all these?
I've learned so much from you, Robyn. Oh my word.
Likewise. I mean, that was kind of a dumb question. I'm like, well, I have to tell you what I've learned from you as well.
I think my top tip would be, and I have recommended it to all my clients, is for everybody to come and have a Neo with you, because for me, it really did help. You mentioned around, continuing the conversation around the ideal clients, really understanding who you enjoy working with and who you're coded to work with, rather than because you can work with them doesn't mean that you're meant to be working with them.
Oh man, it's so important.
Such a subtle.
So important. I remember when I was first getting started, this was in psychology. When I was doing one of my first practicum experiences, I worked at the VA hospital in Leavenworth, Kansas. And those people, listen, the VA hospital and their mental health facility, their psychology programs they're so good. Like, no complaints about that at all. But as I sat with these wounded warriors, that's what I recognized about myself, is just because I can doesn't mean that I should. Because I would leave there feeling depleted, feeling worn out, and God bless them, they were feeling that way as well. But I just recognized I didn't want to come home every single day smelling like VA disinfectant, right? After a hard day's work. I was coded for something different than that. I had to have that experience in order to really recognize that. And I didn't recognize at the time my Neo profile and who I was actually coded to work with and for, who are the spiritually intelligent. Even if you don't know that you're spiritually intelligent, if you think that you are, it would be worthy of having a conversation about your personality so that you can know for sure what exactly the spiritual gifts are that you're awakening to and arising to at this point in your life.
I love it. And do you know what? You've reminded me, because one of the things that people will, we both teach the Akashic Records, speak about is almost like a what's the word I'm looking for? Almost like a spiritual gift hierarchy. If they see someone else as being really clairvoyant and they're, clairsentient, feeling like that somehow one is better than the other. They're not, they're just different. And actually, when you know that you're naturally coded for one way just allows you to accept that way, rather than making a judgment that, you know, you're not coded for the other way.
Yeah, I mean, when I look at your profile and compare yours to mine, so we both score very high on fantasy. So we both are coded for clairvoyance, we'll say. You score average on feelings, meaning that you have a sensitivity to emotions about as much as most people do. I score in the, you know, probably top 1% on feelings. So that would be something, my clairsentience would be just much more refined than yours, if that makes sense. It's not a comparison. It just is like the way I walk in the world is I'm on, my spidey senses on all the time. You can turn yours off and on, but it's not going to be your go-to. It's going to be a kind of a secondary for you. Nothing wrong with that. It just is, that's how you're wired.
And I can
we
turn
both,
it on and off.
we
I know
both,
that. Yeah.
We both score really high on values, meaning that we're the ones who are going to challenge the status quo. We're coded for rocking boats. We're coded for rattling cages, for questioning, why are we doing things this way?
Yes. Oh, I love
so that's where we link arms, is like we're boat rockers. We're visionary boat rockers.
Yeah. Unlocking everybody from the matrix.
How's that for a new archetype? I'm a visionary boat rocker. How about you?
I love it. People will be like, what?
What is that? I want to be one of those too.
Oh, I think this is so important, and I hope that everyone, you know, finds it really helpful, because being able to recognize that, there isn't a hierarchy in terms of the gifts. It's around being able to understand which one's your tendencies towards, and then working with that and developing it, so that you can.
I will say this though, just in terms of hierarchy, and then I'll zip it for today, which is that one of the bees that I have in my bonnet is when I hear people say everybody's intuitive. We know, we have the data to show it, that in fact that is not true. That there are, most people, 68% of the population are going to be average on intuition. So yeah, I mean, they are to some degree intuitive. But then we have this section of the population that includes you, me, and many, many of your listeners who score in the higher ranges, on the tails of the curve. We have access to more of these energetic and spiritual abilities than most people do. So we have to really refine understanding intuition. Yeah, most people are intuitive, but not everybody are the supernatural ones with their gifts, if that makes sense. And I really want to hammer that home, because I think that that's something that when you hear everybody's intuitive or everybody has this gift, why would you start an intuitive business or a business teaching people how to access their intuition if everybody's already intuitive? Like, you wouldn't. So you have to understand that there is a subset of the population who have more access to some of these gifts and abilities than most people do. I know that you understand that, and I certainly do as well. They find their way to us. And for those of you who are listening, who are relating to this, they will find their way to you too, because you're coded to work together. But we can no longer listen to that general beating of the drum that says, well, everybody's intuitive. You're not special. You're not unique. That's like old world paradigm. Let's, clear that from our grids and just say, no, I am in fact unique in the population, and I do have something unique to offer. And the Neo is the thing that still to this day, I don't see myself ever not giving this assessment, because it is such a good refiner and explainer for why you are the way you are. And with that, I will.
Thank you, Robyn. Thank you so much. That's just been, I think, such an eye-opener for people. And, speaking to that, you mentioned around, you are special if you are intuitive, and having it is a gift, and not the whole population hasn't got it, as you say, in terms of, being able to see that within the Neo. One thing I would just say, that if you have a desire to be intuitive, or you're wanting to develop it, that is your intuition calling you forward, because I have a lot of people reaching out for the Akashic Records or for the Helix Method, and wanting to learn and develop and expand and continually grow their skills. That's when they come and have the Neo with you, they'll be like, oh, of course. Yes, I am coded for intuition.
Yes, of course you're coded for this. Of course you would not be drawn to the Helix method if you weren't intuitive, if you weren't ready to activate your energetic capabilities. And as long as we're operating from that understanding, we can basically ignore the world's, impression of us that, oh, you're just crazy, or it doesn't make any sense, or anything like that. It's like, no, it does make sense based on who you are, based on the time of the world that we are in right now. It would make perfect sense that you're coming online, and it would make perfect sense that you are seeking out teachers like Louisa to activate and align with your own gifts.
So good. Oh, I love it. Thank you so much for coming on and joining us, Robyn. It's always a complete joy. And I know that everyone is going to absolutely love listening to your wisdom. Just I know you had a very generous offer. I just want to make sure that is highlighted.
Yeah.
For anyone listening on audio, so that they go and find
Thank you. I love it. A couple things. Everybody is welcome to go on my website and take the leadership quiz. The leadership quiz gets at a portion of your spiritual gifts. And you can do that by going to drrobynmckay.com/leadership quiz. How good is that? And then I'm also, Louisa and I were talking offline about this. And one of the things I love to do is give $200 off the NEO assessment. It's basically a 2-hour assessment with me. So $200 off that. Use code word Louisa to get that. And we will put the link to that in the show notes as well. That is drrobynmckay.com/soul aligned.
Thank you so much, Robyn. That is just absolutely phenomenal. And thank you to everybody who has been listening in and for joining us for this episode. We would love to hear your thoughts and insights. So do come and join the conversation in our Facebook group, Money Kinesiology for 6- and 7-figure CEOs, and share your thoughts there. Until our next episode, and we will have Robyn back again, I hope. Please come back. Sending you all lots of love. Thanks for listening to the Infinite Prosperity Podcast. And if you like what you've heard and want to know more, please go to louisahavers.com. We just appreciate you so much. So thank you for listening and hanging out with us. If there's anything that we can do for you, you can email us at louisa@louisahavers.com. Let my team know if you have any ideas for shows that you'd love to hear or topics you want me to talk about. Really looking forward to hearing from you. All right, that is it for this week, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for today. Looking forward to connecting with you again. Until next time, namaste.